An exhibition dedicated to the life and work of Swiss artist Alberto Giacometti has opened at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Considered one of the most influential sculptors of the 20th century, his career traced the shifting trends of pre- and post-Second World War European art. The exhibition features more than 175 sculptures, paintings and drawings, as well as archival photographs and ephemera encompassing Giacometti's entire career. And this will be the first time some of those pieces have ever been displayed.
The exhibition is a retrospective show, a very large retrospective show of Giacometti, and what is really important is that it shows really the diversity of the work of Giacometti, all the period of the different kind of works he has done, including some very, very rare sculptures that have never been seen or seen very rarely.
Giacometti had many influences in his career, and his work influenced many others. Experimenting with primitive art, surrealism and cubism, he became one of the most prominent surrealist sculptors in the early 1930s.
Giacometti arrived in the surrealist movement late, and he was discovered by Dali, who just entered actually the surrealist movement. And Henry Morton was enthusiastic about his work. And so he's certainly considered now as one of the most important artists of the surrealist period, one of the most important sculptors, because there were not so many sculptors in the surrealist movement.
Abandoning abstraction in the latter half of the 1930s, Giacometti turned his attention to figurative compositions. He wanted to depict the human form in a way that would help the viewer share the artist's sense and vision of the encounter that inspired the work. And it was this that led to Giacometti's most famous sculptures, tall and slender figurines, some of which can be seen here at the exhibition. A similar work, L'homme au doigt, or The Pointing Man, holds the record for the most expensive sculpture sold at auction, selling for just over $141 million in 2015. The move from surrealism to figurative art was not an easy one, the two styles being fundamentally at odds with one another. But Giacometti's dislike of boundaries and desire to try new things and experiment saw him overcome these hurdles to produce his most iconic work.
He tried to reinvent the sculpture. A modern sculpture would be linked with a tradition, which of course the surrealists couldn't accept, and so it was over the collaboration with the surrealists. And then it was a difficult path, because from one day to another he had lost his friend, he has lost his dealer, he has lost his collectors, and he spent several years very lonely in his studio.
It's not only Giacometti's art that is on display. The exhibition also features photos, journals and sketchbooks containing drawings, as well as footage of Giacometti at work in his longtime Paris studio, all providing insight into the artist's process and artistic evolution.
We wanted for the exhibition to show the work, of course, but also to show the process of Giacometti and his character. So that's why we have introduced some photos of the studio, which was a mythical place, really a fantastic place. We have introduced a film, which is very special because Giacometti is making art during the process of this film and is explaining also his work. And so it was really important for us to put Giacometti in his context, in the context of his creation, because it's completely part of the works.
The Guggenheim has a long history with Giacometti, championing his art with his first museum show in 1955, and then again with a posthumous retrospective in 1974. The current exhibition, simply titled Giacometti, runs from the 8th of June to the 12th of September. Henry Morton, TRT World, New York.
To speak more about the acclaimed Swiss sculptor, painter and printmaker Alberto Giacometti, Laurie Wilson joins me now from New York. She is an art historian and psychoanalyst who has penned a book titled Alberto Giacometti, Myth, Magic and the Man. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now, James Joyce is known as the best literary modernist of the 20th century. Elvis Presley is considered the best singer and Alberto Giacometti the best sculptor. Why was he considered the best sculptor in his league in the 20th century?
he was able, with elegant and exquisite form, to convey the main currents of thought and feeling. Before the war, with the surrealists, he was the surrealist sculptor, and he could make work that looked like the sex and aggression that was the main topic of surrealism. So Woman with Her Throat Cut was an image of rape and homicide. After the war, he was able to do a completely different kind of work that conveyed life at the edge of death, and that was, it became iconic for everybody in Europe and the States to see images of human beings barely alive but still alive. And he could do it in ways that were very subtle. So when you look at those skinny figures and you look really closely, you see that the surfaces kind of shimmer. And he would make that in a way, whether he was conscious or not, of something that looked lifelike. They also have these very subtle asymmetries. So there's a little bit higher on the right, a little bit lower on the left. And again, both of those features made these works that shouldn't look alive, look alive.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the connections that you see between his personal life and his artworks?
Well, there are many, but I'm going to stay with the birth and death combination, because when Giacometti was born, his father's best friend had a stillborn son, and that man, Kuno Amiet, became his godfather. Then when Giacometti was 3, his sister was born, Ottilia, and a few days later, his grandmother, Ottilia, died. So there are 2 concurrences of birth and death. Then when his sister gave birth to the only nephew in the family, she died the day after. So he had had at least 3, and there are other instances where death and life came together. I think that's part of what made him able to address in ways that he apparently wasn't fully conscious of, this connection of death and life. And that those historical experiences in his own lifetime made him more sensitive in ways that others were not.
Do you think that's why his figures look so skinny?
Yes, because he was trying to convey what everybody could see after the war, and people accused him or claimed that the works looked like Holocaust survivors. And there were Holocaust survivors in his Paris neighborhood, and he had seen films of the Holocaust, but he always said, it's not that. And I agree that it wasn't that. There was a memory of his mother who almost died when he was 9, who became very thin, her hair suddenly turned gray, and she had typhoid fever and was expected to die. So when he saw the Holocaust survivors, it triggered that old memory of his mother. And I think that's how he found his way to make these very skinny figures. He always said, I don't know why, I can't stop myself, that's what I'm making. But it was his way of addressing the dilemma that he had all his life, what to do with rage and anger and disappointment and hope for something new. And he believed also that what the Egyptians had done with their sculpture was to make alive, because the definition of sculptor in ancient Egypt was to bring to life. I mean, we know about the tombs, but he had been very much influenced by Egyptian art when he was a young man, because some of the sculptor's workshop that out of which the Nefertiti had, the famous one in Berlin, emerged. So he was completely entranced by Egyptian art and what Egyptian artists could do.
Wow. Now, I'm really glad to say that there's an institute dedicated to keeping Giacometti's legacy alive. Tell me a bit about what the Giacometti Institute has to offer.
Well, what I know now, and I finished research on my book a number of years ago, and the Institute has changed, but it welcomes scholars who want to look at many of the works that they have there and many of the archival materials. It also promotes exhibitions. So the show that's here in New York at the Guggenheim has many works from that institute. So it is aiming to help scholars understand better who Giacometti was. They're also doing a catalogue raisonné, which is a never easy thing to do. But the Institute is on track to really help this man's legacy continue.
Well, Laurie Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on Showcase today to talk about the legendary sculptor Alberto Giacometti.
Thank you for inviting me.